Star Wars versus Star Trek, the ceaseless battle of those who don't know the difference between the two. I already have a video on this channel talking about Star Wars and sort of not quite my great love or adoration for the series necessarily, but I haven't really talked about Star Trek at all. And so I think it would be a good thing to revisit some of the things I spoke about talking about Star Wars, but in the context of Star Trek, and to see which one I like better personally from a perspective of a Christian and a Christian worldview. So first, let's just get the stuff out of the way about Star Wars. Star Wars, I pretty much have... Star Wars is actually not properly considered science fiction. It's only science fiction in its technical layout or format. You're in space, you have spaceships, you've got blasters, you've got, all kinds of things that you would see in science fiction. However, if you're talking about general plot or sort of the themes that are explored, Star Wars does not have a science fiction premise. Its premise is primarily that of old legends. George Lucas was super open about this, talking about the sort of story he wanted to make. It was a story for children, and therefore a deeply archetypal story. And archetypal stories are old school fairy tales. Star Wars is essentially a fairy tale. You've got knights, you've got wizards, you've got the hero's journey, of course. And so everything appealing about Star Wars comes from that. It's deep theming. And I would say, from a Christian perspective, the things that we would call deep theming would be things that sort of hit the soul of all human beings. Things about family, some sort of force that we appeal to. Now, of course, Star Wars makes all of this stuff impersonal, right? The force isn't like a person you can speak to unless you watch Clone Wars. But there are deep spiritual themes in Star Wars, confronting the darkness in yourself and overcoming that darkness the quick and easy way, right? Confronting the sin within, right? So, of course, as a Christian, I watch Star Wars and it appeals to me on that level, right? However, of course, the drawbacks of the series, I think, are pretty clear. Star Wars, I don't think, has had a good movie in, I don't know how many years, decades? I mean, Revenge of the Sith, you could say, is a good movie. And I think that may have been the last good one. Some people might argue Rogue One. Some people might say, hey, Mandalorian. It's like, well, Mandalorian isn't really a movie, but I would agree, actually. I think The Mandalorian is quite good. I liked the first season. I liked the second season less. And then the third season, a little bit of a, I mean, thematically, I think they did pretty good, but in terms of like what the story was, or it just wasn't all that good. And I don't really plan on saying Mandalorian and Grogu. So Star Wars has its own issues in terms of just quality. I think the quality of the writing, I think the writers have forgotten what Star Wars actually is and what it stands for and what makes Star Wars, which is deep themes and a blending of science fiction and Western and old fairy tale storytelling. I think they kind of want to do their own they want to say their own thing with Star Wars, and it doesn't really work because you're kind of going against the DNA of Star Wars if you just kind of try to say what you want to say. Now, Star Trek. there's good stuff about Star Trek. I think a lot of the world building, the lore of Star Trek, all that stuff is fascinating. I love every time I want to introduce somebody to Star Trek. I want to bring to them the whole lore of it being within our Milky Way galaxy, and that there's all these aliens, and you have the Delta Quadrant, Alpha Quadrant, Beta Quadrant, Gamma Quadrant, all that stuff. I'm super into like explaining that to people. Love the aliens, the acting, right? Like some of the greatest actors of our time have come from Star Trek. And you have Star Trek is actually kind of science fiction. It's speculative. It deals with a deep philosophical or human sort of struggles, right? Star Trek has a quality of a classic. Now, is it highbrow writing necessarily? Not 100%. I'd say my favorite series, I think the best written series in my opinion, would be Deep Space Nine. A lot of people would say that's not peak Star Trek. And, you know, that's actually kind of what I want to say, actually, about what I don't like about it. Well, I'll touch on that later. I think the vision that Gene Roddenberry had of the future, I think there's something beautiful about it. I think there's things that are a little silly about it, but the good thing that I would say about it is that it's hopeful for humanity, hopeful for our future. He wasn't black-pilled about what would happen, and that's refreshing, especially in a time, in today's time, right? It's good to sort of watch old stuff and kind of get this antiquated view of, oh, humanity is going to rise above our problems, and things are going to get better, right? And that's hopeful. And by the way, that resonates with the Christian view, right? I think all Christians need to be living constantly in the hope that things are not going to stay horrible or bad all the time. They're going to improve. Now here is the negative of Star Trek, which is that same vision, because that vision is not the things getting better is done by humanity. Humanity, when they abandon religion, when they abandon capitalism, when they abandon all these evil things, all of a sudden we become saints and it's amazing and all that stuff. I've never been able to resonate with that vision. And it's in the DNA of Star Trek. And so therefore, because it's in the DNA of Star Trek, there's so much Star Trek that I just could not care less for, because that's the basic premise of the whole thing, you know? And so because that's the basic premise, I wound up not liking Star Trek. And it's a little bit of a bummer, because I grew up with Star Trek. My whole family are huge Trekkies and stuff like that. And I know a lot about Star Trek because I grew up watching it. And then I tried watching it on my own when I was grown. And I was like, oh, I don't like this. So yeah, a little bit of a bummer. And so it's strange. I wind up not liking either Star Wars or Star Trek. Both things of which I was raised with and I love. But now that I watch them as an adult, I really don't like too much of either of them. So the question is, which do I like better? And I gotta say, just for the basic message alone, that is more sort of thematic and deep and strong, I gotta go with Star Wars, but just barely, because I'd say Deep Space Nine, that whole series of Deep Space Nine, I think is better than any Star Wars anything, you know? But if you're asking Star Wars as a whole, then I gotta go, or Star Trek as a whole versus Star Wars as a whole, I gotta go Star Wars, just because its theme resonates with me, a Christian, a little bit more. So I hope you enjoyed listening to my silly opinions about science fiction. If you got your own opinions, drop them in the comments. Go ahead, subscribe, like the video, appreciate it, and see you in the next one. Bye.